This is a story about a haunting at the Alcatraz Island Prison. Before we start, please hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. By the winter of 1962, Alcatraz did not feel like a prison after midnight. It felt like a stone coffin floating in San Francisco Bay, breathing salt air through cracked concrete, rusted bars, and old wounds nobody wanted to name. The wind pushed fog against the cell house windows, and every few minutes the building answered with a low metal groan, as if the island shifted in its sleep. Juan Morales had worked that graveyard shift for 5 years. He was 35, calm, careful, and hard to frighten, with a wife and 2 children asleep in staff housing below the prison. His wedding ring clicked softly against his flashlight whenever he checked the lock. Jesse Whitaker was new, barely 3 months on the island, and most of that had been training, drills, and older guards testing his nerves. Tonight was different. Tonight, Juan was walking him through real rounds after midnight, while the inmates slept and the rock belonged to sounds that did not always have bodies. Juan clipped his keys to his belt. Stay close on this first pass, Jesse. In the daytime, men watch you. At night, the building does. Jesse tried to smile. You always talk like that. Only when it matters, Juan said. They moved down Broadway, the long corridor between the blocks. Rows of cells rose above them, dark and stacked, with faces half hidden behind bars. Juan pointed with his light. B and C are regular housing. Deep block, that is where they send men when the prison is done being patient. The air changed when they entered D block. It dropped so cold, so fast, Jesse saw his breath. Cold air pocket? Jesse asked. Juan glanced at him. That is what I called it my first year. They passed cell 12, then 13, then stopped at 14D. The door looked heavier than the rest, and the darkness around it seemed to press outward. Juan lowered his voice. They say a man was locked in there years ago, screaming that something with red eyes was inside with him. Guards thought he was breaking. By morning, he was dead, his face twisted like he had seen the devil sitting beside him. Jesse swallowed. That true. On Alcatraz, Juan said, truth and rumor sleep in the same bunk. Behind them, a cell door gave one soft metallic click. Both guards turned. Nothing moved. Juan lifted his flashlight, but the beam only found bars, concrete, and the long throat of D block waiting in silence. Remember this, Juan whispered. Do not answer voices that call from empty cells, and if you hear your own name, keep walking. The first round ended without trouble, at least the kind of trouble that made paperwork, but Jesse could not shake the feeling that D block had turned and looked at him. Back at the officer's station, Juan poured coffee from a dented thermos. The room was small, yellowed by weak light, with a radio that hissed between channels and a clock that ticked too loudly. Jesse held the cup with both hands. You really believe all those stories? Juan listened to the building before answering. I believe men suffer in places like this, and sometimes the suffering does not leave when the body does. He told Jesse about old inmates in broken pieces, because that was how guards talked about the dead on Alcatraz. Men who cut each other in the laundry. Men who broke in isolation. Men who went into deep block proud and came out whispering prayers they had not known since childhood. Then Juan nodded toward the dark window. And there was Abby Maldonado. They called him the Butcher. Not famous, not important, just mean enough that other men lowered their voices when he passed. They say he died in here cursing everybody, and afterward guards smelled cigar smoke where nobody smoked and heard a blade scraping the bars slow, back and forth. Jesse forced a laugh. You trying to scare me before my solo round? I'm trying to keep you alive until breakfast, Juan said. The radio popped. Under the static, a man's voice came through, distant and wet, like it was speaking from inside a wall. Open up. Jesse stared at the radio. You heard that. Juan's face stayed still. I heard static. The clock clicked to 2 in the morning, and Juan stood. Your solo check. Broadway, B, C, D, then back. Do not rush, do not act nervous, and do not let the inmates see your face if you hear something. Jesse picked up his flashlight. And if 14D says my name, Juan stepped closer. Then you come back without answering. The gate opened with a scrape that sounded too loud now that Jesse walked alone. He passed Broadway, then B block, then C block, where the sleeping inmates were almost too quiet. Pipes clicked behind the walls, one after another, like knuckles tapping inside concrete. Halfway down the row, Jesse heard a woman crying. He froze. There were no women in the cell house. "Who's there?" he called. The crying stopped. The cell door on the upper tier slammed open, so hard the sound cracked through the corridor. Inmates woke shouting, but Jesse was looking up. Because that cell was supposed to be empty, and in its darkness, something pale tilted its head. Then from D block a man whispered, "Jesse." Jesse should have gone back. One had warned him, the voice had called his name, and C block was awake with inmates rattling bars and yelling questions he could not answer. But Jesse was new, and new guards hated looking scared. So he lifted his radio and tried to keep his voice steady. "Morales, this is Whitaker. Possible disturbance near C block, upper tier. Radio check." Static breathed back. Then the same voice whispered through the speaker, "Open up." Jesse lowered the radio, and the metal in his hand felt suddenly cold. He moved toward D block because the round had to be finished, because Juan would ask, because the inmates were listening, and because his name had come from there, soft and personal, like a finger touching the back of his neck. At the D block gate, the lock was already open. Jesse stared at it. He knew he had locked it earlier. He remembered Juan checking it. The gate swung inward by itself, slow enough to seem polite. Cold rolled out, thick and damp. Jesse stepped inside, and the noise behind him faded, as if the living world had been shut behind a wall. The first slam came from cell 12. The second came from cell 13. The third came from 14D. Each door struck once, in order like someone walking down the row from the inside. "Enough," Jesse said, and hated how small the words sounded. A man began moaning inside 14D. Not yelling, not pretending, but moaning from a place beyond pain. The kind of sound a person makes after being left alone too long. Jesse raised his flashlight. The small viewing slot in 14D was black. Then two red points opened behind it. The moaning became laughter, low and rough, and another sound joined it. Metal scraping metal, slow, deliberate, back and forth. From beside Jesse's ear, a man whispered, "You knew, boy." Jesse spun, but no one stood there. His light flashed across the wall and found a wet handprint sliding down the concrete. Then the doors started opening. One by one, cells along D block rolled back with heavy clicks, revealing interiors that seemed too deep for their size. Voices poured out, crying, praying, cursing, laughing without breath. Jesse ran. He hit the gate shoulder first, stumbled into Broadway, and nearly crashed into Juan, who was coming fast with his baton drawn. Juan grabbed him. "What did you answer?" "I didn't," Jesse gasped. "I swear I didn't." Behind them, D block went silent. At the far end of the corridor, a broad man in a dark prison shirt stood watching them. His face was half hidden, but his hand moved slowly at his side, scraping something sharp along the bars. Juan whispered, "Maldonado." The figure smiled, and every door in D block slammed shut at once. Juan had survived 5 years on Alcatraz by never letting fear choose his direction, but when those doors slammed, something old moved behind his eyes. He pulled Jesse backward. "Station." "No." They moved fast at first, not running, because guards did not run in front of prisoners. Then the lights above Broadway flickered. Every bulb dimmed to a sick yellow glow, and both men sprinted. Juan's radio burst alive. At first it was only static, then keys jingling, then a man breathing hard through broken teeth. "Morales," the voice said. Juan stopped so suddenly Jesse almost hit him. The voice came again, slower. "Juan Morales," Jesse whispered. "You told me not to answer." "I know," Juan said. The voice changed. It became smaller, softer, familiar in a way that made Juan's face twist. "Papa." Down the corridor, beyond the bar gate, a little boy stood barefoot on the concrete, wearing pajamas, his hair messy from sleep. He looked exactly like Juan's son, Mateo, except Mateo should have been in staff housing with his mother, behind locked doors, far below the cell house. The boy lifted one hand. "Papa, I got cold." Juan took a step forward. Jesse grabbed his sleeve. "That is not him." Juan turned, furious and terrified. "You do not know that." The boy smiled, and it was too wide. Behind the child, the tall figure from D block unfolded out of the darkness, one shoulder at a time. The scraping sound began again, metal over metal, slow and hungry. Juan crossed himself and backed away. For one blink, the child's face changed into something bruised, stretched, and hollow-eyed, with red light burning deep inside it. Then the thing screamed in Mateo's voice. The sound tore through the prison. Inmates shouted from every tier. Somewhere overhead, a guard tower bell began clanging, though no one had touched it. The light snapped out, and the cell house became black bars, black concrete, and two shaking flashlight beams. Juan and Jesse ran into the officer's station and shoved the door closed. For a moment, there was only their breathing. Then something knocked on the other side. 3 slow knocks. A voice outside said, "Open up." Jesse shook his head. That's the radio voice. The wall clock stopped at 3:15 in the morning. A key turned in the lock from the outside. Juan stared at the door. Impossible. The knob began to move. They shoved a filing cabinet against it and held the door while something pushed back gently, patiently, like it had all night. Then cold mist slid under the door, and inside that mist, voices whispered both their names. By dawn, the haunting had stopped pretending it was only sound. The wall clock jumped from 3:15 to 5 in the morning without warning. The station door unlocked by itself. The hallway outside sat empty under gray morning light. No broken lock, no footprints, no inmate out of place, no proof except Juan's bleeding palm and Jesse's face, pale and hollow, like part of him had stayed behind in D block. The day shift arrived laughing about the fog, carrying fresh coffee and ordinary voices into a place that had tried to swallow 2 men whole. Juan said nothing in front of them. He only walked Jesse outside, down the damp path toward the dock, where the morning boat rocked against the pier. In daylight, the island almost looked harmless. The prison stood above them, stained and silent, with gulls circling the roof and sunlight touching the barred windows. Jesse kept looking back. Juan put a hand on his shoulder. Go see your girl. Go see your family. Eat something hot, sleep somewhere that is not this island, and keep your mind straight. Jesse's voice cracked. You saw it too. Juan looked toward staff housing, where his wife would be making breakfast, where Mateo would be alive, warm, and real. Yes, he said. That is why you need to leave for a while. What about you? Juan turned his wedding ring with his thumb. My family is here. The boat horn sounded low across the water. Jesse stepped onto the dock, then stopped. Juan, what if it follows? Juan did not answer fast enough. The ride to San Francisco should have felt like escape. Jesse sat near the back, collar up against the wind, watching Alcatraz shrink behind him. The prison blurred in fog, one black shape on gray water, and for a few minutes, Jesse almost convinced himself that distance mattered. Then he heard keys jingling behind him. He turned. No one stood there. Only a few passengers, a deckhand, and a woman holding her hat against the bay wind. Jesse faced forward again, breathing slowly, telling himself the night had been fear, exhaustion, old stories, and a prison full of men trained to make guards nervous. That was when the deck beneath his boots grew cold. The smell drifted over him, not seawater, not diesel, but cigar smoke and damp concrete. The woman with the hat frowned. Do you hear that? Jesse's heart dropped. From somewhere below deck came the slow scraping sound. Metal over metal, back and forth, back and forth. The boat pushed through the fog, and San Francisco waited ahead, bright with morning, full of streets, churches, diners, and people who had no idea that something from Alcatraz had learned how to cross water. Jesse closed his eyes. A voice leaned close to his ear, smiling through the cold. You answered when you listened. Thank you for your support, and thank you for tuning into our stories. Some are fiction, and some are based on a true event. We would really appreciate it if you could like this video, share, and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for a new story every day.
Thank you for your support. And thank you for tuning into the darkest horror stories of your life. Some of the stories are based on true events or experiences. Please do us a favor. If you could hit like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel. Never listen alone, and stay tuned for a new horrors and stories.